Okay, this is John. I'm going to try to do this. I hope the sound is coming through okay. I see that I went out and hang on, I have to mute myself here so I don't want to listen to myself. I went out and hit some golf balls and I forgot to fix my hair, but so be it. High definition is not good for old people like me. So just sort of a little bit of an update. If you got sound, just give me sort of, yeah, hey, we can hear you and all that other stuff. I've completely changed my setup and that type of thing. And I just really beg your patience and indulgence on these, trying to do these live, because it's difficult. It's very complicated because I'm trying to monitor the chat. I'm trying to monitor the sound. There's about a 15-second delay between me talking and then what's getting onto YouTube. I try to monitor questions and comments, and I do have some people help on that. So just appreciate your patience on this. It is very complex. I've strongly considered not doing any more live updates just because of the 10, 15 things that you got to monitor while you're trying to talk and make sense. I noticed today, like, for example, Tom Hughes on Hope for Our Times had Alex Newman on at 5 o'clock live. And Tom has several people. I was just there a week ago, Sunday, by the way. I did a live update with him on Sunday evening, the 23rd. HopeForOurTimes.com. You can get that video. And he has several people there. There were, 3, 4, 5 people there helping run the live stream and that type of thing. So, and even with all those people today, he just had massive problems. Now, sometimes I wonder if that's not because of potential content, or he had Alex Newman on, and Alex is pretty strong against the New World Order. So sometimes you wonder if people aren't just laying in wait to attack somebody like Alex. So anyway, appreciate your patience, and let's try to keep this short. I'm going to try to cover a couple topics. One is judicial reform in Israel, normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and some of the things that are going on there. Again, this is not going to be in great detail. Just so you know, there is a conference I'm going to be speaking at in Texas now these things are so crazy. Hang on a second here. I have a new computer, and of course it has to I'm going to try this. So let's see, entire screen. Okay, sorry about that. It will not do this. Okay, hang on a second here. I'm going to have to... this is so maddening. Let me go here, Inner Studio. Let's see. Yeah, see, it's going to make me, so this is so maddening. So I have a new computer, and the new computer says, oh, you can't, I have to restart Chrome, and I'm using Chrome to do my update here. So I guess I'm not going to be able to share my screen. I'm going to try one other... I'd have to restart everything, and I'm not going to do that. So we'll just talk a little bit about what's there. So I'm going to do a conference with Tom Hughes. August 25, 26 in Round Rock, Texas. You can go to hopeforourtimes.com and you can read about what's going to happen there. I think that the live stream registration is open for that. If you want to see the conference I did with him a week ago in San Marcos, Texas, me, Brandon Holthouse, Scott Townsend, Don Perkins, Tom Hughes, myself, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some of the other guys. You can go to hopeforourtimes.com. You can sign up for the live stream, and you sign up for the live stream for San Marcos, and I think you get the live stream for the one in Texas that's coming up in 3 weeks from Friday and Saturday, whatever those dates are. And that'll be a whole different group of speakers. Tom and I will be the same, but then there'll be some others, Olivier Melnick, Alex Newman, and I don't remember the others. So, but appreciate you signing up for those. You can look at those talks. One of the themes I've kind of been talking about in the different conferences that I've done this past spring and summer, for example, we did a conference, Last Days Bible Conference in Calgary in early May. I think I spoke 4 or 5 times that weekend. And then I did Moriel Conference in Scotland in mid-June, Moriel TV or rtntv.org for that. And then I did the conference with Tom and the other guys a week ago in San Marcos, California. One of the things that's been very encouraging about these conferences is just this incredible time of fellowship with fellow believers. One of the things that you hear from people all the time when you're at these conferences is that they really feel isolated. And it's a real blessing for them to come to the conference. And it's a blessing for us as speakers, too, to meet all these people and fellowship and talk and get some of the feedback and questions and try to understand where people are coming from. So that's, and by the way, Tom, there's a couple different pronunciations of my last name, and I don't really care. Just call me. That's the important thing. So, great conference that we had. Oh, Billy Crone. Billy Crone was the other one that was in San Marcos. And Greg Denham, who's the pastor there at Rise Church where we held the conference. Great guy. Had some great talks with Greg while we were there. And I'll be doing a different talk at Texas Talks at Texas, and we're going to actually travel there by car. We flew for the first time, PM and I together for about 3.5 years. Everything went well. We did catch a little bug. Didn't feel so great for a few days in California after the conference, but we're able to see PM's stepfather. He's 96, and at that age, you just never know when the last time you're going to be able to see someone is. But it was hotter than blazes. I was in California for almost 2 weeks, and I played 7 holes of golf, which is, not 7 rounds, 7 holes. It was just too hot. I went out one morning, and after 2 holes, I knew it was a mistake to have even tried. So I just didn't even bother the rest of the time. So let's get to this. So live stream for hopeforourtimes.com. Now, one of the things I want to talk about is judicial reform in Israel, because this is a big deal, and it's really tearing apart Israeli society. So let's first look at what judicial reform is. How did it come about that people wanted to do judicial reform, what the problem is, and what the different sides are, and the, I think, rather potentially dire situation that the protests over judicial reform and some of the outflow from that are putting Israel at great risk from a defense standpoint. So judicial reform really came about, the genesis of it was back in the 90s. There was a Supreme Court justice named Barak who at that time put in what we would call a reasonableness standard. And, as a lawyer, you learn in law school, one of the first classes you take is torts, and you learn about the reasonable man. And you know that the reasonable man is a very malleable thing that's very difficult to define. Everybody knows what it is, but nobody can define it exactly. So he put in, and this was at the time that the political left, socialist left, had controlled Israel since its founding. So after 35 years of this, the left was going into decline, and they're going into decline on a demographic basis. This is similar to what's happening in many cultures in the West. The demographic decline it's not going to change. It's set in stone. People are not going to turn it around. For example, as I've noted many times, China is in demographic collapse. Now, they still have the most people in the world, and they still have great power. They still have great economic power. But if the Lord tarries in 25 years, China may be half the size. So you don't lose 700 million people in your population and not have huge economic impacts on a local basis, let alone a geopolitical basis. But until that happens, China's still going to be a pretty important power in the world. But what happened in Israel is that, as here in the United States, people on the left just don't have babies. Abortion is big in Israel. Abortion is big here in the United States. And it has caused, in certain sections of society, a demographic decline. On the other hand, the Orthodox communities, and I would put in with that the Orthodox, the Zionist Orthodox, conservative Orthodox, and then ultra-Orthodox, they have incredibly high birth rates. If you've ever been to Jerusalem, particularly in Orthodox neighborhoods, every single couple that you see has a baby. I remember when we went there in 2017, we were driving to the apartment we were staying at down near the old city. We went through an Orthodox neighborhood, and I didn't count, but in a kilometer, which is a little over half a mile, I know I saw over 100 baby carriages on the street that we were driving down. It's rather shocking. And so what's happening is that the demographic structure of Israel is changing. Whether you agree with Orthodox, in their orientation and that type of thing, and it's not going to change. So the apex of the left it started declining in the 90s. Barak at that time, the Supreme Court justice, put in the reasonableness standard, which essentially allowed the court to exercise, and it's expanded over time, to exercise a lot of control and authority over aspects of the government of Israel. Israel has it's a parliamentary system. It doesn't have a bicameral legislature like we have. In the United States, we have checks and balances. We have the Supreme Court, we have the Supreme Court, and it just is, they don't have that in Israel. So the Supreme Court put in this standard, and it's now become viewed as the way that the government can be controlled by not going too far to the right. Eventually, this is going to fail. So everybody has this protest. One of the things that the Netanyahu coalition ran on was the need to have judicial reform. And I think when they ran, the Orthodox parties that eventually formed a coalition with Netanyahu's Likud party were pretty clear that they were going to put through this judicial reform. They were elected in a free and fair election. There was no allegations of fraud or anything that I know of, no stuffing of ballot boxes or anything like that. And the Netanyahu coalition with these three Orthodox parties, they took control of the government. They have 64 seats. They needed 61 out of the 120. They got 64. They formed their government in December. The election took place in November. They formed the government in December. The legislature, when I was there in December, we were at some of the initial meetings of the legislature, committee meetings and that sort of thing, as they're forming the government. And then Netanyahu was sworn in right between Christmas and New Year's. And Netanyahu, and so they've pushed this. They've backed off on the judicial reform. They've had protests every week. They've had anywhere from, I think Caroline Glick sort of humorously noted that the protest in Israel of people opposing judicial reform number somewhere between each week between 10,000 and 5 billion people. But they've been massive protests. They've been all over the country, and they've been every single weekend. It's been very disruptive. One of the things that has probably been most disruptive in the protest is now that the reserve officers, and I'm not sure if this is actually true or if this is a psyop, reserve officers in the Israeli Defense Force and the Israeli Air Force supposedly have signed their name to these letters, although I don't think that it's crystal clear that they've signed their letters, but they claim that thousands have signed, and that should this law go through, they will refuse to serve. That puts Israel at risk because Israel relies in great part on its reserve forces, both from the Air Force and the Israeli Defense Force. And without these people, it will be very difficult to cover anything that might be going on in terms of a invasion from the north. So there's a lot of Hezbollah, the Iranian proxy that controls Lebanon, is constantly pushing. They've put up some tents on the Israeli side of the Lebanon border. Israel's come out recently and said, hey, it would probably be best if you didn't have people in those because Israel, I think, is losing their patience with it. They may take it out. And Nasrallah says, and then I guess, and today the Iranian foreign minister came out and said, look how weak Israeli society is. They can't even get along with each other. How are they ever going to fight us? They're weak. They're going to decline. They're going to fall apart, and we're going to take everything over. So that's the status of judicial reform. My own opinion is that the left, through the court, has, just like in the United States, used the court as really kind of a super legislative, super executive branch. For example, there's been some ridiculous things that have occurred. So there's been these indictments of Netanyahu over the last few years. The cases have been going on for a while. When I was there in December, I asked some people, how long are these cases going to go on against Netanyahu? Because it's been like 2-3 years, and they said they might go on another 3, 4, 5 years. And part of this is to keep Netanyahu otherwise occupied and not governing. It's virtually identical to what is being done by the weaponization of the justice system in the United States against people on the right, including former President Trump, who is now the victim of lawfare. I mean, there are big articles today about how Trump's political action committees have spent $40 to $60 million on legal fees. And, as a former lawyer, we all love legal fees. But it's a way, but this is being done to bleed everybody dry. The system has been weaponized, and they're doing the same thing with Netanyahu. The other thing that's happened with Netanyahu, though, is that the Attorney General, which is part of the executive branch in the United States and is controlled by the executive branch, it's not completely independent. That's a complete myth. But the Attorney General has sort of been broken off from the executive function of the government and acts independently. So they now have this Attorney General. There was an Attorney General Vanderbilt who was in there for a number of years, and he kept filing these indictments against Netanyahu. And then the new Attorney General, I can't remember her name, she has essentially put in I don't know if she made Netanyahu sign something, but essentially she said, look, Netanyahu, you're under indictment. And remember, indictment is not a conviction. Indictment leads to a trial. It's not a conviction. And so you see all these people in the United States, oh, Trump's indicted, he should resign. And then Israel, they say, Netanyahu's indicted, he should resign. But effectively what the Attorney General in Israel has ruled is that, well, Netanyahu is under indictment, and because he's under indictment, then he should not participate in any of the discussions or political negotiations regarding the judicial reform. And it's a ridiculous standard. It's almost impossible to follow. The Attorney General and the court has also decided, for example, how they want things, how the IDF should act in certain instances when they do terror raids and that type of thing, because they're going to apply a reasonable standard. So the IDF, with all their training and all their intelligence and everything, can go through something, and then the court has effectively, with the reasonable standard, the ability to come in and shut that down. And again, it causes a big security problem within Israel. There are claims that this is the end of democracy, but these are people who are democratically elected who are pushing this. And if you don't agree with them, that's fine. You can still be my friend, but defeat them in an election. That's the way you handle things in a democracy. You don't tear down society, but this is the way the left is going. The left is led in large part by some of I think the Labor Party, which I don't even think is in the new Knesset because they've declined so much. And then Ehud Barak, who's was prime minister for a short time, was head of the IDF, as defense minister. And he said, there was a interview that he gave, talk he did at Chatham House a few months ago. And he said, listen, if we can just get 9 or 10%, 6 to 10% of the people to agree with us and act and be disruptive, we can completely change the government. And he's a leftist. He doesn't care. He's also a friend of that Jeffrey guy that didn't kill himself in New York jail a couple of years ago. And Ehud Barak is on his list. And he's just turned into this, I would call him a radical leftist. So that's the status of this, and who knows what's going to happen. But the most troubling thing are these reports that a lot of reservists will refuse to serve. There are many who talk about Israel is on the verge of civil war. I don't know if that's the case. Even our president has weighed in. There was a statement from the White House on July 24th, so a week ago today, and this is what Karine Jean-Pierre, our press secretary, White House press secretary, their White House press secretary said. As a lifelong friend of Israel, President Biden has publicly and privately expressed his views that major changes in a democracy to be enduring must have a broadest consensus as possible. It is unfortunate that the vote today took place with the slimmest possible majority. We understand talks are ongoing and likely to continue over the coming weeks and months to forge a broader compromise with the Knesset in recess. The United States will continue to support the efforts of President Herzog and other Israeli leaders. I wonder, they never seem to mention Benjamin Netanyahu, as they seek to build a broader consensus through political dialogue. And certainly everybody wants a broader consensus, but at some point, somebody's going to make a decision, somebody's going to vote, and somebody's going to be upset, and people are going to have to deal with it. I personally do not see this as the end of democracy. I know there is a concern that the Orthodox parties will leverage their power in the Netanyahu coalition to ram through all sorts of legislative changes to essentially make Israel a religious state. That is very possible. I don't know that they have the power to do that. I don't know that the Likud, which would have to go along with it, will allow that to happen. The government, I think, would probably collapse before that happens. But I don't know. I just know that I think it's the whole concern over judicial reform and dialing back the reasonable standard is it's overwrought in many respects. We've had years where we thought the judiciary was too powerful here in the United States. Things have started to change, and of course, everybody's having a meltdown about it here as well. Because people that say they believe in democracy don't really believe in democracy. They only believe in democracy as long as you're making decisions that agree with their particular position. And so everybody's, now there are reports. There was reports in the Times of London, for example, on Sunday. There was an article that said a mass exodus is taking place from Israel. And they cite a statistic from Channel 13 News in Israel, a poll that found that a high percentage of people, and I can't remember the exact number, a high percentage of people want to leave Israel. And so the question is, are they actually going to leave Israel? I don't know. I don't think that they had good proof in the poll. Camera called the Times of London. Camera.org called the Times of London. The poll on Channel 13's was that 28% of respondents were weighing a move abroad. 64% were not, 8% were unsure. So there you have 72% who aren't doing it. 28%, a little over a quarter, are weighing whether they should move. But they're getting all the tech companies, they're getting other people like Moody's to come in and say, oh, if this goes through, this will be a terrible thing for the rule of law and will have to affect Israel's bond rating. So that's really something that I think is it is tearing Israeli society apart in many respects. And you're seeing, just like here in the United States, you're seeing stark divisions between conservative, religious people and people on the left that don't want any control. So let's see. So that's judicial reform, but pay attention how that's going. And I'm not so sure. How does this stack up prophetically? I'm not sure. I do know that in Ezekiel 37, there's the two sticks. There'll be two sticks in the land, and they'll become one. Some people have interpreted that to mean that there will be a highly divided Israeli society, and we're there. There's no doubt that we're there. So, anyway, I think everybody's a bit overwrought about this, and I understand the concerns about the Orthodox parties. I would share some of those concerns. And it's interesting too right now that I believe that the majority of people that are serving in the frontline IDF and Israeli Air Force units I believe it is either the majority or close to the majority are Orthodox. Now, not ultra-Orthodox. And listen, the ultra-Orthodox have taken advantage and used the way the Israeli government is structured. They've taken advantage of it. They get a lot of welfare benefits. They don't really serve in the armed forces. And there's a lot of resentment about people paying welfare for guys to sit around and study Torah. And it's a problem. It's an issue that has been allowed to fester, and at some point it's going to come to a head. So, but there are a lot of things, particularly when you look at what's going on in northern Israel. Now, I'm going to recommend a website that I've recommended a number of times. It's called Alma Israel, Israel-alma.org, Israel-alma, ALMA.org. And they track a lot of things of what's going on in northern Israel, things that are going on with Hezbollah. I have a huge bookmark folder in my browsers that I rely on quite a bit. For example, on geopolitics and strategy, I probably have 25, 30 bookmarks that I review on a regular basis. If you want to understand, I'll try to put a link in the notes below. There is a thing called National Sovereignty, Individual Liberty, Kohelet, Kohelet, Kohelet Policy Forum. If you want the conservative analysis of judicial reform, they have a Q&A on judicial reform. They I think it's a very good analysis. They have a number of articles why judicial reform is necessary, Q&A on it, and their conclusion is, listen, this is not going to tear apart society. It's actually part of it's sort of a triumph in democracy that we're able to get to this point to discuss this, because nobody elected these judges, and the way that the left has taken control of the Supreme Court allows them to essentially appoint only ideological people who are ideologically the same as them. There's really no way to prevent them from being appointed to the Supreme Court. There's, I think, a committee of 8, and you have to get at least 6 votes to get appointed to the Supreme Court, and 3 are controlled by the Supreme Court. So they, as long as they always agree, they can veto it. They have a veto over everybody. So as a result, the Supreme Court judiciary has become very left-leaning, and again, it's being weaponized against people on the right, just like how much more proof do we need that the justice system in the United States has been weaponized against everybody? It's whether you agree with Trump or not, or like him or don't like him, this is a very troubling thing. And I seeing what's happening to people. You see what doesn't happen to other people that might be named Biden or something like that. They seem to escape with everything. So there's a lot of parallels between what's going on in Israel and what's going on in the United States. Now, next thing I want to talk about, and it's probably the last thing. Well, they're kind of related. So first of all, we had this supposed coup. Prigozhin, the head of Wagner, did this coup in, I don't know, when was that, late June? Started marching on Moscow, and then he's supposedly exiled to Belarus, and then pretty soon he's having meetings in Moscow with Putin, and the whole thing looks like it's kind of a made-up thing. And one of the things that it might have been was a way to, everybody says, oh, look, the Putin government's ready to fall. His Wagner group, this is his main private army that does a lot of things for Russia, particularly in Africa and the Middle East. They're trying to take over Russia, and the end result was that a bunch of Wagner people ended up in Belarus on the northern border of Ukraine and on the border of Poland. And now the questions are, is there something planned? Was this just a ruse to get the people from Ukraine, the Wagner people from Ukraine, into Belarus where they can cause more problems for other people? This past week, there was a summit in St. Petersburg where Putin brought in a bunch of African leaders, and I think it was the vast majority of African countries sent somebody to this meeting. And at the meeting, there's Prigozhin. He's meeting with the African guys, and this is because Prigozhin. I would highly recommend that you go watch a video on a YouTube channel called Caspian Report. The guy who prepares those videos, I don't know. He's Azerbaijani, I believe, but he does just a great job, particularly in graphics. And he has a video from a couple weeks ago where he talked about the Wagner Group's power projection on behalf of Russia in Africa. And he noted, and I think I played part of his video in my last update a couple weeks ago. Prigozhin and Wagner are effectively in control of the Russian foreign policy in Africa. And they're playing up anti-colonial sentiment. There's this problem going on in France with particularly African migrants and other Middle Eastern and Middle Eastern migrants causing a lot of havoc and really putting France, many people think, on the verge of a civil war. And that, by the way, would sort of square with what Ehud Barak says. You get about 10% of the people causing disruption and the whole government can fail. And they have about 10% of the people in France, and they're trying to get the government to fail. So you can kind of see the synergy there on this 10% thing that the leftists, this rule that they seem to apply. But for example, there's been across Central Africa, there's a good New York Times article. It was in Sunday's paper, I think. Yeah, Sunday's paper. Title of the article is Coast to Coast, a Corridor of Coups brings turmoil in Africa. And all the way from Western Africa to Eastern Africa, all the way across the belt, in all of these different countries, you've got Guinea, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Chad, Sudan. Since 2020, all of those countries have had a coup. The most recent one was Niger, and immediately Wagner was there with Prigozhin saying they're going to support the military leaders who've come to power in Niger. And so what Russia is doing is they're using Wagner will come in and help support the government. It's the way they do foreign policy. For example, they have an agreement with the leader of the Central African Republic. Central African Republic has diamond mines. I believe they have some rare earth mines. And so Wagner Group comes in and says, we'll help support the government. We'll keep the security situation. And the Wagner Group is just brutal. I mean, they go in there and they rape, pillage, and burn, but they also get a cut of the diamonds that are sold or the minerals that are sold. And they're doing this all the way across. Now they've added another country, Niger. So there was a lot of question. I raised it. A lot of other people raised it. Hey, what's going to happen with these Wagner forces in Africa? What's going to happen with the Wagner forces in the Middle East because of this supposed coup? And the answer is, it appears nothing, that Wagner is still doing what they were doing. They just may not be doing it in the same places. And so then the question becomes, what about the situation on Israel's northern border with Syria? And if you look at a map, there's a think tank. I have to pull this up. And I apologize for not being able to share my screen. As I said, I got a new computer and I haven't been able to get everything. You have to kind of re-enable everything on your security settings. There is a website, and it's called jusor.co. It's www.jusor.co/en. And it's a website that sort of analyzes the situation in Syria. And if you look down through there, they have an article from a couple months ago where they show all the different people groups that are positioned: Hezbollah, Iranian-backed groups, Russian military, the Wagner Group, and that type of thing. You can see that they're all along the Syria-Israel border. Now, the question is, how many of them are there? I believe the estimates that I've seen that the Wagner Group has maybe 5,000 soldiers, mercenaries in Syria. A lot of times they will hire local people. That number seems to be pretty square. But the question is, we always talk about Ezekiel 38, 39 invasion, but there's a logistical aspect to that. 5,000 Wagner troops is not a great company and a mighty army. I'm sorry, by any stretch of the imagination. but they can project a lot of power. And Russia, through its air defenses, controls a lot, effectively controls the airspace in Syria. Israel does not really act in Syria without Russia knowing about it. And Russia, Russia has some problems with Syria. They have some problems with Iran. And so Russia tries to play both sides against the middle, allows Israel to do some things, but doesn't allow them to do too much. But it's a very volatile situation, and there's a big concern in Israel that there's a looming war coming from the north in the very near future. Now, is this Ezekiel 38 and 39, or is it a precursor to it? I think it's a precursor, and it could break out at any time. There are a lot of plans. So the result of some of this, so you've got the Africa situation with Wagner, you've got the Syria situation with Wagner, and Russia and and Iran and Syria. You also have the problem with Hezbollah in Lebanon. And you have our government sort of helping fund all of this stuff. There's a good article by Victoria Coates. She's a former U.S. attorney at National Review talking about, hey, Biden, I guess you're getting what you pay for in Palestine with the Palestinians. And everything's very volatile in the Palestinians. They're in a bit of a internal dispute to civil war themselves. There's some attacks going on at a Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon. Now, the first thing you got to ask when you hear a story like that is, wait a minute, why is there a Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon? I thought there were only Palestinian refugee camps in Israel. And the answer is no. There's probably more Palestinian refugee camps outside of Israel and what they call the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, than are actually, they're probably more outside of Israel proper, from Jordan to the Mediterranean. And that's because the Palestinians, called Palestinian Arabs, following really was sort of a term that became popularized by the KGB in 1964, using Yasser Arafat because the Russians, Soviet Union at that time, wanted to cause some destabilization in the Middle East, that they could always kind of come in and say, oh, look at how great we are at keeping peace and how we're on your side and that type of thing. It's the same thing they're doing right now across Africa. Oh, look how nice we are to you. We're helping you mine your minerals. We're helping you mine your diamonds. We're taking a cut, but we're helping keep the government stable. And we're doing this because we oppose, like you, we oppose the colonial powers that have raped and pillaged you for all of these centuries. And we're your friends. So doing that in the Middle East. And so they created the Palestinians, the refugee camps, and their pawns. They're Palestinian camps, some of the worst ones in the world, probably the worst ones in the world. They're not even in Israel. They're in Syria, they're in Lebanon, they're in Jordan, that type of thing. About, I think, 75 to 80% of the Jordanian population is Palestinian, including the queen, the wife of King Abdullah II. She's Palestinian. And it's a huge problem. And so, everybody, all the local governments tried to keep them at bay. And remember, Jordan, did that thing, and the whole Black September thing back in the 70s, where they just slaughtered a bunch of Palestinians and sent them packing to Syria or to Tunisia. So they're political pawns. They don't like that. Now, here's the next thing, and I'll finish with this, I promise. There is a push for, and this is sort of part of the Abraham Accords that Trump brought in, and I said on Tom Hughes the other night, maybe it was at the conference, somebody asked me what I thought of the Abraham Accords, and I said I thought that there was a lot of synergy between the people, the groups they're trying to bring into the Abraham Accords and the people groups identified in Psalm 83, and that the Psalm 83 seems to set forth people groups who have a permanent hostility towards Israel. And I think that's a fair assessment. So the question is, what are they going to do? How is this all going to play out? And so now what they're doing is there's been a big push. And look, this was one of the two main things that Netanyahu said he wanted his government to do when he took office back in December. Number one was stop the Iranians, and number two, normalize things with the Saudis. So there has been a push, but our government, the U.S. government, seems to be playing the Palestinian issue against Israel and trying to do it in a way to be pro-Iranian and pro-Palestinian at the same time. As a result of that, Saudi Arabia has been looking to, they want security guarantees, they want the help of Israel against Iran, but they've also tried to hedge their bet, if you will, by entering into talks and sort of normalization agreement with the Iranians. That's been fairly significant development over the last few months. But we continue, like the United States, we're funding the Lebanese government, the Lebanese army, and that's effectively under the control of Hezbollah, which is clearly anti-Israel, clearly wants to destroy Israel. The U.S., and I'm not sure I understand this yet, I'm still looking into this, but currently right now under construction is I think it will be the second or third largest embassy compound that the United States has anywhere in the world is being built in Beirut. And it's costing in the multi-billions of dollars. So our government has been trying to fund the Lebanese government. You remember this Amos Hochstein, who is an energy guy with natural gas company, came into the Obama administration and was sort of the energy guru for U.S. Middle East policy. Israel found gas in the Mediterranean. That's good for Israel. There's a supply there that would supply Israel for hundreds of years, and there's even enough for them to sell. There was a plan that Netanyahu and some of the Eastern Mediterranean countries had put in place to build a pipeline from Israel to Cyprus to Greece to get Israeli gas to Europe. That would have been very helpful now when they stopped using Russian gas. But late last year, I'm trying to think if it was late last year or the year before, might have been late 2021, Amos Hochstein, now the State Department energy guru again under the Biden administration, came in and said, it's too expensive to build the pipeline. We're not really pushing hydrocarbons. So we're gonna put a kibosh. We're withdrawing any support we ever had for the East Med pipeline. Well, that left Israel in a bit of a spot because you can only make money off gas if you can actually get the gas to the market. And right now, I want to make clear a couple things on how I think about this. One, what Israel has found in the Eastern Med are significant gas finds, but they are not the largest gas finds in the world. There's absolutely no proof of that. The largest gas field in the world is the South Pars field between Qatar and Iran, which is kind of an interesting radical Shiite Iran and radical Sunni Qatar share that gas field. That's the largest one in the world. The other problem is that Israel's not getting much gas to Europe. The only way to get it now is to liquefy it, put it on a ship, and send it there. But there's a backlog of ships that could do that until 2027, 2026, maybe 2025. Some of them might, a ship or two might be able to be delivered. And you need ships to transport the gas. You need offloading facilities in Europe. Now, Europe has upgraded their liquefied natural gas facilities. But amazingly, that I think a lot of people miss in all of this is that the U.S. has increased its liquefied natural gas capability during this time period. So they shut down Israel Israel doesn't have the liquefied natural gas. They don't have the pipeline. But lo and behold, here comes a company, particularly one of the biggest companies that's doing this from the United States to the Middle East, is a company that a guy named Amos Hochstein was an executive for before he came back to the Biden administration. And lo and behold, this company can make literally billions of dollars selling liquefied natural gas to Europe once they have the Russian sanctions and everything in place. I'm sure it's just an accident it's just a coincidence. So there is this talk now. What the U.S. does, there's talk of normalization. So on July 27th, Thomas Friedman, who's a lefty and sort of fashions himself as the great expert on the Middle East, who writes for the New York Times, published an article, an op-ed, opinion piece called "Biden is Weighing a Big Middle East Deal." So here's just the opening paragraph. For the hundreds of thousands of Israeli democracy defenders who tried to block Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's judicial coup on Monday, the stripping of the Israeli Supreme Court's key powers to curb the executive branch surely feels like a stinging defeat. I get it, but don't totally despair. Help me may be on the way from talks between the United States and Saudi Arabia. Yes, you read that right. So what you find from this is that Thomas Friedman is one of the main propaganda arms of the Biden administration. So he comes out last week and he says, hey, we're trying to put together this big normalization agreement to the Biden administration and the Saudis. And then you saw on 2 days later, Jake Sullivan did a press conference and says Biden presses ahead. This is from the New York Times again. Biden presses ahead with effort to broker Israeli-Saudi rapprochement. The president sent Jake Sullivan, his national security advisor, on the latest diplomatic mission seeking to forge ties between Saudi Arabia and Israel. So now you're going to see this push for normalization. I think it's going to happen. The Saudis, on their part, have come out and said that. I talked about this last Sunday with Tom. There was a peace proposal that was floated by the Saudis to create what was called the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. It appeared in Al Arabiya. It appeared in the Wall Street Journal in June of 2022. And it appears to be what Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, would like to do. That would result in certain concessions by the Palestinians. But Mohammed bin Salman is still the crown prince. He's not the king. And it just came out through the Saudi channels that King Salman, the father of the crown prince, who's very infirm, but he came out and said, listen, I want this Palestinian state. I want a two-state solution, and that's the only way that it's going to be. I don't expect that that's going to change. The Saudi position on that particular thing, the Saudi peace initiative from, I think, 2003, 2002, might even be back from the 90s. You can read about that. That's the Saudi position right now. That's King Salman's position. And given the way Saudi tribal culture is, I would not expect, in fact, I would almost guarantee you that until King Salman passes on, there's not going to be a overt change in Saudi policy. You're going to hear a lot of things in the background, like you're hearing now, about we need to back off, the Palestinians need to back off and that type of thing. But the formal Saudi position is going to be what King Salman is, because they respect what the king has to say. He's the elder person in the tribe. But when Mohammed bin Salman comes to power, if he's the one who succeeds his father, I mean, all indications are that he will, that's going to be a thing. So there's no breakthrough yet. They're talking about it, but they're floating it. But here's what this article says in the New York Times on July 29th. The Wall Street Journal reported on Saturday that Saudi leaders will convene peace talks on August 5 and 6 involving representatives from Ukraine and dozens of other countries, including India and Brazil, which, like Saudi Arabia, have not joined Western efforts to isolate Russia over its invasion. Russia, which has refused to negotiate, is not included in the meeting. The journal said Jake Sullivan was expected to participate, but the National Security Council would not comment on Saturday. A Saudi plan to host such a meeting highlights a cascade of complicated and sometimes clashing dynamics. Washington wants to enlist Riyadh against the Russians, prevent it from growing closer to China, but bring it together with Israel, coordinate with it against Iran, persuade it to finally put an end to the war in next door Yemen, and keep it from raising the price of gasoline at the pumps heading into an election year. And then again, they make reference to the Tom Friedman column. So it's just a thing you need to watch because there's a lot of things going on there. And again, I think that whatever logjam there is with regard to the Saudi position is going to change once King Salman passes away. And he's very infirm. Probably suffers from some form of dementia. But he's in power and he's protected. So anyway, so that's, oh, by the way, there is also one other thing to watch out for. In 3 weeks, August 21st, 22nd, I believe in Durban, South Africa, the BRICS countries will be meeting, and they're going to talk about bringing in a gold-backed currency. I don't think it's not a currency convertible to gold. It's a gold-backed currency to replace the dollar as the reserve currency in the world. I personally do not think that they're there yet. I know that they're trying, and I think eventually they'll be able to do this, but I just don't think they have the capacity to handle the trade in the new currency. I just don't think they're there yet. And I believe that the gold-backed thing, my personal opinion is the gold-backed thing is a ruse. And that's really what they're concerned about is central bank digital currencies. That's really where it's going to end up. The gold backing was to get, oh, we love gold. Everybody loves gold. Let's buy gold. Let's get a gold back reserve currency. And I personally think it's a ruse that it's going to go to a central bank digital currency. So I'm going to take a quick look at the questions here and see if there's anything. I hope the sound has been okay. I haven't monitored because of the delay. Anyway, let's see. So anyway, so I think that well, I'm just going to do it, and we'll talk to you on Sunday. Sunday, I'll be back at FBC. I'm going to preach first hour on Philip and the eunuch, meeting the eunuch, and the Book of Acts, and then I'll do a prophecy update second hour, and then should be back there for the next couple of Sundays. And maybe the next 3 Sundays. I'm not sure yet. So thanks for listening. Again, sign up for the conferences at hopeforourtimes.com and sign up for the live stream. And you can watch the videos and the new ones that are coming up at the conference in Round Rock, Texas, in the last Friday and Saturday in August. Again, I'm going to end. Thanks so much for your patience today. God bless.